By the time you watch this video, Cyberpunk will be 1 year old. It's been a long and exhaustive year of problems and patches. Cyberpunk to me isn't a great game, but it's also not a bad game either. Judging from the amount of videos I've made on the game when it was released, it's clear that I genuinely liked what CD Projekt Red was doing. I just feel that people let the negative aspects of the game cloud their judgment on content that deserves actual praise, leading to people saying everything about the game is horrendous, which is just untrue. So today I'll be revisiting Cyberpunk once again and giving it the thorough review it deserves. Let's get started. Usually I would start most of these videos with Cyberpunk's first impressions and how it tries to capture the player's attention, but there are more important things to discuss first, as throughout the release of the game, Cyberpunk was criticized for two specific reasons, that being its technical issues and its lack of features. For its bugs and glitches, most of its consistency revolved around your platform and your specs. I played Cyberpunk on my Xbox Series X, but a friend of mine played on his day one Xbox One. Most of the game's bugs at the time, like enemies appearing out of nowhere or NPCs T-posing, occurred much more for him than it did me. The other technical issues were based around your builds and playstyle of Cyberpunk, such as an issue where your gun would magically reload every time you swapped to that weapon. Obviously, if you use blades throughout your playthrough, then you wouldn't experience this problem, but that doesn't mean it didn't exist. So to make this easier, I'll just be going over all the bugs I found during my two playthroughs, then discuss it afterwards. The first problem occurred right in the beginning of the game during my Corpo life path, and it's related to not being able to answer the phone. Thankfully, the game answers the call for you anyway, but there were numerous times I would try to answer the phone and wasn't allowed to. Just like it was on day one, this car doesn't load in sync with the cutscene, causing the car to look untextured. I don't know what caused this next one, but apparently if you run too fast to the helicopter, it won't take off in sync with the player, as it's technically supposed to ascend before you get up the stairs. During the scene where Takamura and V defend themselves from Arasaka soldiers, the first guy actually phases into the game rather than drives on screen like he should. When doing the side quest where you have to rescue the surgeon for Dennis, his voice changed tones mid-dialogue.
I know, here.
May this blade serve you well.
Right after this, I went to clear a few NCPD assault activities, and during combat, my shotgun would just not fire. This continued even after I had switched weapons. Surprisingly, I had only one crash, which occurred while driving after talking to Wakako. This next one happened quite a bit and is definitely player dependent, as numerous times, especially during brain dances, the audio would overlap and then just cut off so the next line could start.
Chopping people up, they were scrolling XPDs. Okay. Coffee was cold. Like from the day before. Pizza looked fresh,
used
though.
to have a bit so?
The brain dances in this game are obviously quite boring after the first time through, so I wanted to finish them as fast as possible, which caused Judy and V to have multiple conversations at one time. The only way to prevent this from happening is to not go too fast during the brain dances, but obviously the player shouldn't change their way of playing just so the problem is fixed. Our next bug occurs numerous times where for no clear reason I couldn't drive in a certain direction and was stuck. This happened a few times when entering the Aldecaldos camp, but the game blocks you on purpose so you don't run everyone over, but in this instance I was just in the middle of the road, nowhere near the camp. Immediately after this, as I was approaching the objective, the game stopped me too far and I couldn't progress. The game attempts to slow the player down so the interaction between V and Panam can start, but the game doesn't stop you on a dime, rather brakes for you. The game also relinquishes control of the vehicle since Panam is supposed to drive right after this. So if you go too fast, the game will stop you past the objective and leave you stuck in the car until you reload the game. Onto the more infuriating bugs, the black bar during the Samurai concert still exists and continues to sour my mood every time. During the mission with Takamura and V where they're at the market, there were no NPCs where I was, and to make matters worse, on the way there I somehow got into combat and this stayed for the entire mission. There was no enemies in any of these areas, so combat should have stopped immediately, but when time was passing due to waiting or teleporting to the next part in the quest, it still persisted. And of course, because I was in combat, the entire conversation was completely inaudible thanks to the music.
Strong and disciplined man. The strongest man I have ever known.
As for the others, numerous times even on release, the game would refuse to let you swap your camera angle, forcing you to drive in first person. This perk changed every time I viewed it until the description was just incomprehensible, and I also got stuck in the water and was unable to move at all, forcing me to reset. While some of these bugs were frustrating, I couldn't help but laugh at some, like when Saul just disappeared mid-conversation, when I caught Takamura T-posing, and when my gun was reloading on its own for no reason. If you've been counting along with the video, then you may have noticed that there were roughly 16 to 17 unique problems I had encountered during my playthrough. Obviously that total number is much larger as some had occurred more than once, but even more interesting than that is that 12 of these bugs were new. However, this plays into what I said earlier. I didn't use guns in my original playthrough, as that was centered around blades. So the issue related to the weapons, like my precision rifle reloading on its own, could have been in the game since day one, I just never encountered it till now. Regardless, it's clear that even after the enormous amount of patches this game received, there is still work that needs to be done. But this leads me to my next point, is I shouldn't just be focusing on the bad. CD Projekt Red did fix many issues with this game, many of them being very specific, so it's quite possible any issues you had in your previous playthrough are gone, and your game is now practically bug-free. This even happened to me, as while I don't recall all the issues I had with Cyberpunk back then, a few notable problems never occurred during my recent playtime, such as my character not being bald during the suicide ending, being able to see out of the AV during Rogue's ending, and the item descriptions not staying stuck on my screen anymore. As for my final thoughts on this section, it's clear that while CD Projekt Red fixed lots of bugs for many players, my experience is the only thing I can go off of. Your game could be worse or better than mine depending on your platform, specs, and the previous issues you've encountered. With the game continuing to introduce new bugs I had never seen before, it shows that the game is quite possibly just as bad as it was on launch, and that's not a good sign. The last thing to discuss in this section is CD Projekt Red's broken promises. This is probably what bothers me the most about this game, as what I'm about to say makes Cyberpunk sound like a completely different game on paper. A couple months after release, a Reddit thread by a user named Spikecraft was started, which was a community list of all the content CD Projekt Red had promised the players. This thread is split into two categories: features that were promised but later cut during development, and features that were expected on launch but never came. The latter is what I want to focus on more, as the former is not as problematic as it sounds. For example, in that section is the ability to scale walls. During one of the gameplay demos, V can be seen scaling a wall. Obviously this isn't in the game, but a news article from July 2020, 6 months before the launch of the game, stated that this wasn't going to make the final release. So we knew ahead of time that this wasn't going to make it to launch due to certain limitations. However, everything I'll be stating now was mentioned in news articles, interviews, or videos by CD Projekt Red saying that this content would be in the game, and was never followed up on that it was going to be cut. As far as the community knew, this stuff would be in the game on launch. The list will be in the description down below if you want to check it out for yourself, but it goes as follows. Cyberpunk was going to have a very well-developed AI. CD Projekt Red is quoted saying, "We've greatly enhanced our crowd and community systems to create the most believable city in an open world to date. The city streets are bustling with crowds of people from all facets of life, all living their lives with a full day-night cycle. It takes 3 minutes after stepping out of your apartment to see that this is completely wrong. Police don't drive cars, AI will not attempt to drive around roadblocks, and will have the same animations when ducking and running away from combat." Cyberpunk was going to have a wanted system where NPCs would hunt down the player and even be able to interact with corrupt police officers, allowing you to bribe them. Keeping with the theme of police, they were also going to have a much larger role in the game's crime system, as certain areas would change based on the district. Rich areas like City Center would have had more police, and more rundown areas like Pacifica would have fewer cops, allowing you to get away with more crime. The gameplay was massively tuned down, as monowire and gorilla arms are supposed to have more uses, like monowire being able to hack people from a distance. The game was also quoted to have a deeper role-playing system than The Witcher 3. It stated in the 48-minute gameplay walkthrough that random occurrences like scavengers ambushing you would be possible, which we know is completely false, as while this did happen, it was scripted and only happens one time in the game. As for the other promises, I'll file these under a miscellaneous category. Quest decisions were going to have a relevant impact on the story, and the life paths were going to be much more in-depth and would lead to non-linear quest design. I don't think an explanation is needed on that. There would also be a meaningful day, night, and weather cycle that would make areas more dangerous by either having more gang members out at night or storms that will hinder the player. Neither of these exist or don't seem to exist, especially the weather, as the dust storm only plays a role in 2 quests. Cyberpunk would also have distinct styles of clothing and have NPCs react to the clothing you are wearing. And finally, while it wasn't stated by CD Projekt Red specifically, I think it's quite obvious that it's industry standard to expect your game to run smoothly on launch. This isn't even all the stuff in this list. I highly recommend you check out that Reddit post in the description, or better yet, watch any video on Cyberpunk prior to its release, like the trailers and gameplay demos, and you'll see just how much is missing from this game. I am completely aware that everything shown was from a demo build of the game, and of course is subject to change. CD Projekt Red did a good job of telling us that some of the content in the game wouldn't make it to its full release, like scaling walls and vehicle customization. So why did they mention these but not the dozens of other pieces of content that would be missing? On paper, this sounds like a completely completely new game, and a game I'd much rather play compared to the one we got. While I do have some issues with the game itself, what I am more upset about is the content we were promised but never received, as now I feel like a fool, and that's downright embarrassing. While its technical issues are laughably bad, its first impressions were quite impressive, until you look at it a little more critically, then you discover a few problems. Before you start the game, you're given the option to customize your character and choose your abilities and life path. The concept of this is great, and I genuinely liked this game's customization and starter points, but its life paths were underdeveloped. The 3 life paths in the game are cool and were a great idea, but you just felt left hanging once you were done with them. The point of the life paths was to create a unique experience for the player, and also tell us the player how Jackie and V became friends and how V got into Night City. Each of these stories is very unique, and with what we were given, it was great. I liked how not every life path had to do with killing people, a theme we'll definitely see later. I also enjoyed how the life paths continued to play into the role the game was establishing. During the corporal life path, we see V throwing up because of the stress at work. Many people in the corporate world of Cyberpunk work horrible hours and get very little benefits. V ends up taking medications to calm his nerves and keep him awake, and he even has his own life coach. Clearly, living this way will make someone very bitter and angry, and the game knows this, as they'll allow you to just outright ignore people in conversations and blow them off because work comes first. It's a great representation of the dystopian lifestyle that the working class face in Night City. The other life paths also do the same, but the corporal path really excels in this department. Each of them also do a wonderful job explaining how V made it to Night City. For the nomad path, we can see him cross the border while trying to smuggle in gear. For the street kid path, we find out that he left Night City to find a better life, but ultimately never did and ended up coming back. And for the corporal path, while it was never told how, we can just assume V either grew up here or was moved here because the mega corporation said so. As for the relationship between Jackie and V, only the street kid and to an extent the corporal life path makes sense. The street kid path ends with Jackie trying to take the same ride as V, and they end up both getting caught, and after being released, apologize to each other for screwing up the job of the other, and through some conversation they find out that they have lots in common. Both of them frequently visit the Coyote Kojo and are acquaintances of Pepe. However, the corporal path doesn't really explain how Jackie and V know each other than the fact that they're just friends. The corporal path can kind of be seen as a friend helping another friend after losing his job, but it's never explained how the two met. The nomad path bothers me greatly, as the entire mission revolves around you transporting the stolen gear across the border with Jackie. Border security tipped off the corporation Jackie had stolen the gear from, and we have to defend ourselves. After we find a spot to lay low, the two get into a heated argument over it. During this, Jackie reveals that he didn't even have the money to pay V for the job, as he was just going to bust our ass the moment we crossed the border, but he decided not to because we're all right. Jackie tries to convince V that he should stay in Night City, as the two have some chemistry together, and it's possible that they could sell the stolen gear he has and go halfsies on it. So Jackie, the guy who claims V and him have chemistry together despite that being completely untrue, tells V he will split the price of the iguana after literally telling him a minute prior that he didn't plan to pay him for the job. After hearing all of this, V joins him? How does that make any sense? Who's to say that Jackie won't split the price 50-50 and skip town again? These two are literal criminals. Once someone ruins your trust, it's all over, especially if it's a person you are just meeting for the first time. So the fact that V partners with him is completely idiotic and is 100% forced onto the player, since they need V and Jackie to be friends and to make it into Night City. Thankfully, the life paths don't just stop here though, as the game will provide the player with unique missions and different dialogue options throughout the playthrough, except the dialogue options don't change anything within the story, as it needs to be accessible to everyone, and the option rarely appears throughout the game, so they barely feel usable. There are more speech checks and dialogue related to your skills rather than your life path. As for the missions, there is only one mission per life path, and there really isn't much substance within them anyway. It's sad how none of them truly matter, and if we were to get into the storytelling of the game, many would agree that the street kid is the only canon option. No matter the life path, V becomes a merc and goes into a life of crime, doing jobs for clients that more than likely result in people dying. This feels like the street kid path, as you're going to fixers and clients for jobs. You aren't living out in the outskirts of the city smuggling in gear, and you're not contacting people from your prior employment, so it just feels like V was meant to take the street kid route. This makes the life paths completely useless, as all you're really getting is a 20-minute introduction to explain some minor backstory, which leads to the same start of the game and only gives you one unique option and a small amount of opportunities to actually use your life path background and dialogue. Cyberpunk's first impression initially was well done, as it has a robust selection of customization to make you feel unique, and 3 life paths that would have given the player a unique introduction and backstory to their character, allowing them to build a much deeper connection to them until they realize that the life paths are either rushed or feel forced and are never brought up again, making that intro worthless. While the game does gatekeep the player after this, allowing them to travel only within Watson, we can technically start the optional content of the game. I've been a fan of the cyberpunk aesthetic since I first discovered 2017's Blade Runner 2049. It's a world that is overwhelmed with technology, where people are more likely to have cyber implants in them than be fully human. While on the surface it sounds great, once you dig deeper you realize why the style is considered dystopian. CD Projekt Red nails the setting of this game. It feels like a cyberpunk style city, and it checks all the boxes that a place like this should have. The world is supposed to look great on the outside but be terrible on the inside. Night City is overrun with crime and is policed by the law that would rather shoot first and ask questions later. The city itself is free from government rule, which means it's highly regulated by megacorporations, which is why Arasaka has such a big influence in the game. Night City citizens are always one wrong step away from death, as the gangs, police, and megacorporations poach as much as they can out of the working class. Besides the groups within Night City, the everyday citizen has all the effects of a highly advanced society within a cyberpunk world. Everyone is below the poverty line, with only the megacorporations having enough money to survive, and with an increase in production across all industries, pollution and climate change are major contributors to the city's conditions. Cyberware has become a commonplace within Night City, but due to the aforementioned details, faulty black market cyberware runs rampant, and should someone add too much cyberware to their body, they could develop cyberpsychosis. To combat this, the police once again just prefer to eliminate the psycho rather than treat them. It's very clear that this world sucks, and CD Projekt Red does a great job of conveying the dystopian feeling of the game by expanding on one of those details. Cyber psychos can be found throughout the game, and each of them tell a story about the people that are living with this illness. I did an entire video back then based on this exact topic, as I felt this was one of Cyberpunk's greatest strengths. These were so different from the other side activities in the game, as you weren't always shooting at people. It was either about navigating the area they resided in or scanning around looking for clues. Each of these areas usually has a story along with it, whether that be from shards or the actual mission itself, and all of them are great. One encounter was about someone who was kidnapped and had implants forcibly put on them. Another was about a girl who was tricked by her sister into getting faulty implants because she wanted to ruin her sister's beauty. She would then go on to marry her sister's fiance without her knowing. This already sounds tragic enough for her until you realize that all the cameras near the crime scene were from a TV studio who was filming a reality TV show. They knew about the sister's rivalry and let the girl know of her sister's attempt to marry her fiance. The studio did all of this traumatic stuff to her for just a few clicks, and it really portrays the terrible motivations behind reality TV. Probably my favorite was a random guy on the end of a bridge. He's backed himself into a corner, but has managed to fend off all the police that have arrived. After subduing him, you discover from his laptop that he's a combat veteran who suffers from severe PTSD. Thankfully, at his current job, there was a PTSD program that he could enroll in, but he was eventually fired and lost that privilege, leaving him no way to handle his problems. This caused him to not keep a job, causing him to be homeless due to no income, and eventually led to how we see him in game. There are 17 of these encounters in the game, and I can't think of a single one that was bad. Each of them portrayed different people from different walks of life and showed how they got cyberpsychosis and how they're currently dealing with it. It's truly one of the best groups of side content in the game, which actually makes me extremely upset, as this is overshadowed by all the other activities that are some of the most boring content I've played in a video game. Besides the cyberpsychos, we have gigs and NCPD hustles. The gigs are a toss-up. Most of them have the same content, and depending on your build, might seem like the same mission. There are a few gigs that are quite boring, but do become very exciting when you switch your playstyle. Like this gig where I needed to take some guy from this building and put him in the trunk of a nearby car. If I were to shoot the place up, I would just kill everyone, then carry the guy's body out. But if I were to play a sneak character, then I would try to avoid detection by sneaking my way in. Like I said, depending on your playstyle, some may feel unique, but most of the time it's the same content. The NCPD hustles, however, are just awful. There are a few different versions of them, all of which are basically the same thing. You complete the assaults in progress by either killing all the criminals and collecting the loot, or looting the crate undetected. Reported crimes are beaten by killing all the criminals in the area, then grabbing the illegally stashed loot. An organized crime is just killing all the criminals in the area. Considering the fact that the game's main gameplay loop is killing enemies, collecting their loot, then replacing your current gear with better items, it's just the same thing you've been doing in any of the other missions before. This leads to all of these being incredibly boring. boring. I can't recall a single time I enjoyed doing these, and it also showcases something quite unique, that there's no penalty for being caught. If there's an optional stealth objective that you fail, you might miss out on a bit of rep or money, but considering how many of them there are in the game, the loss is negligible. Running and gunning in this game is not only more exciting, but more efficient. All you'll really be doing is going to the location of the hustle, finishing it within 2 minutes, and then going to the next location. Funny enough, driving from one hustle to the next is sometimes slower than doing the actual hustle itself. They're just lazy and boring activities with a clear lack of depth and interactivity that are copy-pasted so much it's hard to tell what activity you're actually doing. Speaking of which, another example of poor depth and development is the gangs and fixers in Cyberpunk. The gangs and fixers in this game are incredibly shallow. Every district in the city has a head fixer and a gang that holds the territory. The gangs only exist to be shot at, and the fixers really shouldn't even be on the map at all. All the gangs' backstories and values are incredibly unique. Maelstrom is a psycho gang dedicated to putting in as many implants as possible, and the animals prefer to use their cyberware to increase their strength. I also believe they're the only gang in the game that will attack the player with just their fist. The story of these gangs is incredible, but everything else in-game is awful, because there is nothing else. On rare occasions, you can work with certain gangs, like the Voodoo Boys or Maelstrom, assuming you pick the correct choices, but that's just in one mission. Some of the gangs, like 6th Street and the Tiger Claws, do absolutely nothing with the player, so they are literally just made to be shot at. There is no way to be recruited into these gangs or even ask them for assistance. It feels like such a waste of potential, as these gangs could have had a much larger role in the game, but they were just put to be target dummies. The fixers fall into the same problem. The only thing the fixers do is call you about missions and call you about cars. Them calling about cars just feels so far off from what they actually do in the game. I feel like CD Projekt Red needed some way to give the player new vehicles, so instead of just adding car dealers, they just gave them to the fixers, and it's not even that engaging either. The fixer just randomly sends you a text of a car nearby, to which a map marker of its location permanently stays on your map. To buy the car, you just go over and hop in, and the game will take your money. I'm pretty sure all these vehicles just exist on the map. You can't steal them from people or rob the keys from the owner, they're just cars that exist. The missions are just as bad. The fixers will call and text you about mission details. Seeing as most of these missions are pretty much the same thing, minus a few instances, there's really no point to read the details since you already know what to do. You either kill or sneak your way into this building, then either grab the loot, rescue the person, retrieve the car, etc. This is all the fixers have been reduced to. You can visit them on the map, but you're only given 2 to 3 dialogue options, and that's all. Something as small as giving them a personal mission would have been great. Not something from a client, but an issue that they have that you need to fix for them. The game was almost going down this path with Regina, as she's the one who wanted you to help with the cyber psychos, and she believes a cure can be made, but nothing came from it. These missions could play into the fixer's backstory and be able to make them feel like actual characters. There's just a clear lack of depth with both the fixers and gangs, and it makes it really hard to care about them. Everything we've talked about makes Night City look great but feel empty. Night City is a dystopian setting, and if you were to walk along its streets and look around, you would notice it immediately, but venture too far off from those streets and you'll see the real Night City, a place that doesn't provide the player a way to customize their character, car, or apartment, a way to store said cars, and also doesn't give the player a reason to care about its handcrafted fixers and gangs, as they're either just people in your contact list or target dummies waiting to be shot. Night City is known as one of, if not the deadliest city in the United States, so most of your time in Night City will be spent in heated fights with gang members and scavengers. Cyberpunk gives the player a plethora of weapons and abilities to choose from, allowing you to make a unique character that's unlike any other. At the start of the game, you're given the chance to increase some of your attributes. These are the core building blocks of your build, as the more points you put into these attributes, the more skills you can unlock with them. There are 5 attributes, which are body, reflexes, intelligence, cool, and technical ability. Body is centered around strength and defense, reflex will increase your firearm damage, intelligence will reward you with more quick hack abilities and RAM slots, cool is all about stealth, and technical ability is more of a miscellaneous dump stat that is centered around various things like looting, crafting, resistances, crit damage, and explosions. This is where your initial build will start, however you can go deeper from here. You could go fully into firearms and use the body stat for health and defense, then level up the reflexes stat to get more damage skills. But if you prefer sneaking, you could replace the body stat with cool and have a Island range build. There's definitely a lot of potential with these builds, and they could be very fun to try out and use. The game even lets you respec your skills if you want to move things around, except it's only the skills, not the attributes, so you're still stuck in the same archetype you created, but are allowed to change the minute details of your skill set. I personally wish this was able to be respec, but the only reason I can think of as to why is that they didn't add this part because people could just respec their skills if they lack the attribute level to bypass a door or something. Not only does this sound incredibly tedious, it's also the same thing with save scumming. Yes, being able to save anytime and anywhere does promote save scumming, but the positives outweigh the negatives greatly. Besides the standard weaponry you can find on enemies or in crates, you can also equip yourself with cyberware that can greatly enhance any build you want to play with. Loud and proud players can even replace their operating system with cyberware that doesn't even have any RAM slots or quick hacks. Seeing as you won't be using them in the first place, this now allows you to gain buffs from other equipment. As for what we have, Cyberpunk definitely tries its best to make combat fun by giving the player numerous trees to pick from, allowing for tons of different builds every playthrough. However, for me, I wasn't always having that much fun with its combat. I recognize this is totally subjective, as lots of people have different tastes. Some people prefer to use stealth whenever possible, when I try to never use it unless I have to, so already there's going to be some bias towards certain archetypes. So as for stealth, I will say that it was quite fun despite me preferring a different playstyle. Stealth with the introduction of quick hacking can really change this game in a drastic way, because not only could you never engage in combat, you'll never be close to anyone either. Quick hacks will go as far as your scanner goes, and depending on your operating system and abilities, you may never even need a weapon. I do highly recommend playing this way if you enjoy stealth, as it was really fun when things went right. Blades were by far my favorite weapon to use, as with the right skills, not a single enemy is challenging. The blades are also one section of the skill tree, so once you maximize a good portion of the stats you need, you can just put those extra points and dump them into other stats like increased armor or health, allowing you to be pretty much unkillable. The blades were always a blast to use, however the gunplay felt a little dull. There was such a large selection of different guns that it's quite easy to gravitate towards a favorite weapon. Some of these weapons even have special traits like smart rounds and ricocheting bullets, but due to the game's ammo system in combination with its skills, it severely limits your options. SMGs, LMGs, precision rifles, and ARs all share the same ammo type, and all of these but LMGs are in the same skill tree. So you can have an assault rifle, SMG, and LMG on your character, you're just going to waste all your ammo. Since the game gives us 3 weapons to use, we need to fill those other roles, which are either shotguns, pistols, snipers, or even melee if we wanted to dabble into it. But due to how the skill trees are separated, you'll more than likely have 3 guns with mediocre upgrades, or 1 gun with incredible upgrades, and the other 2 with next to nothing. And while it's not the end-all be-all of this game, the upgrades are very important, as they do make your weapons stronger. This also becomes more of a problem later when you have to change weapons. The same weapon you're currently using could be swapped for the same one, since the enemy that died was higher than you, thus making that gun automatically better. While this example is not as bad, it becomes a problem when you have to swap a weapon that you didn't want to use but now need to use because its stats are just better. This also goes for your armor as well. This game is one where you need to prioritize your stats or your fashion, as there's no way to change the look of the armor and keep its stats. The very last part of its gameplay though is its crafting, and to be completely honest with you, I've never touched crafting in this game. I find it extremely unnecessary. Crafting is nice if you want to make more grenades, health inhalers, or even make upgraded versions of legendary gear, but I never needed to. Most of my armor and weapons were getting outclassed as I ranked up, so there was no point in spending all this time and money on upgrade components when they would just get outmatched by any weapon. To add to this, I also never ran out of inhalers or grenades. I could definitely see some use out of it on higher difficulties when you need a specific health booster to heal, but I just never ran out. Assuming you loot enough of the bodies in each area, you'll have more than enough gear to go around that crafting was just an afterthought to me. Cyberpunk's gameplay variety is very fun, and does allow for lots of creativity when it comes to builds you want. It allows for endless possibilities, and that is a very important feature for a game like this. But while its blades and stealth were fun, the gunplay in the game just felt a bit confusing, as it seems to encourage using a diverse arsenal of weapons, but it also hinders the potential of said weapons by making the ammo the same for most of its guns. So far, I've definitely been critical of this game, so it's time to change that, as Cyberpunk's biggest strength is in its side quests. Cyberpunk has somewhere between 70 to 80 side quests the player can complete, and just about all of them are perfect. Most of these weren't just simple quests that could be finished in a few minutes, but rather multi-stage experiences that involved complex moral conundrums that show the player a more sinister side to the city. I won't be going over every quest in this video, as there's too many to go over, so I'll just talk about a few of my personal favorites. Our first quest is one that is deeply disturbing. Randomly while strolling through Night City, you may get a call from Wakako about a job. When we arrive at the location, the client Bill Jablonski talks to us about wanting to kill a specific person. Bill says this guy Josh is a murderer. We discover that Josh murdered Bill's wife, and while he was put on death row for his actions, he was able to get out of it. From the details we get from Bill, this job may not go as planned as we have very little info on who Josh is riding with or whether or not they're considered a threat. We eventually find the van that he's in and chase them near an underpass until they crash. Bill gets out of the car and is about to start shooting until he's put down by the cop that was driving. Assuming you're quick enough, you can actually shoot the cop and Josh, which ends the quest. Wakako will pay you for your trouble and you'll go on your way without even knowing that there's a quest tied to this. If you let Bill get shot, Josh will vouch for your safety and instead asks you to accompany him on his journey. It's a strange request, but obviously we have to accept to continue. Already, I love the way this mission starts, as you can go an entire playthrough without ever seeing the full story of it. Wakako even drops hints about this as she asks V what he thought about it. Why would she ever bother bringing that part up? Even if this was something she says all the time, from our perspective, what was there to understand? We killed a murderer and we got paid. It's a brilliant way of telling the player that there might be more going on here. This part of the quest was also really well written, as when you talk to Josh, he refuses to elaborate on anything until you get in the vehicle. So you either say no and live your life wondering what he wants, or give in and say yes so you can see what's going on. Josh is a murderer on death row, as told to us by Bill. The reason he escaped his death was that he claimed to have found God during his time in jail. This isn't the exact reason why, but it's more related to the characters in the car with us. The cop Vasquez is the guard, and he's there to make sure Josh doesn't run off. But Rachel is from a media company who's planning on filming a documentary about him. In fact, we already know what that documentary is, as we can see it plastered all over Night City. Josh also lets us know that we're going to see someone today, which is why we're traveling in the car together. The person we meet is a woman named Zuleika, and it's at this table where we discover the whole truth. Josh murdered Zuleika's brother and was receiving letters from her while he was in jail. Zuleika came to accept and forgive Josh for what he did, despite how traumatic this must have been for her and the family. Furthermore, we find out that when Josh claimed to have found God in prison, a braindance studio, the one Rachel works for, wanted to make a video out of it, and Josh took up their offer so that his death can be used to show others that redemption is possible. From what it sounds like, it seems that Josh wants to do some good in his life, and the media studio definitely wants to exploit him for profit. The actions of one will help achieve the other person's goals, so they agreed to work together. After this discovery, we see Zuleika's mom, who's not as happy as Zuleika is to see Josh in her home again. She kicks both of us out, and then we head to a nearby restaurant for some quick food. This ends the quest for now until we get a call a couple days later where we can continue. This was such a fantastic idea for the quest, and the amount of options we are given is incredible. After our visit with Zuleika, Rachel will pull us aside and talk about Josh. She mentions how he's very valuable to the company, and it's because of his authenticity. He's not putting on some act for the brain dance. He genuinely believes his crucifixion can change the world. It's because of this that prompts Rachel to bring us aside, where she tells us to leave. If we keep talking to Josh, we might screw up the job and get him to question his decision. So she's trying to avoid that entirely by paying us double the original amount if we leave. This section also brings up a good point, and it's that this mission gives us numerous times to just leave and drop the quest. I'm unsure if it's because of the heavy subject matter within the quest, but we can leave 5 different times throughout these missions. One is before we get in the van, another while we are in the van and learn about him and his heavenly journey, the third after we discover the truth about his crucifixion, the fourth being here with Rachel, and the fifth one during the last mission. It's nice that the game is letting the player leave if things get too heavy. It's a nice way of not forcing the player to do something they might not want to do. Going back to the mission, the reason there is another quest is because Josh is second guessing his decisions. Here's where we can do one of many things. No matter what happens, Josh will be crucified, but we can either help nail him to the cross, not help him but watch, or just leave. This choice and other dialogue choices throughout the missions will affect the overall quality of the DB and in turn also affect our pay. If we say too many things to Josh that make him question his decision, we'll get paid less as the DB wasn't as authentic, but if we avoid saying any of these options, we can get the most pay from it. This interaction at the end is incredibly hard to watch, as the nailing of his wrist and legs is right in front of you. My original decision was to help nail him to the cross, as I believe that while I didn't want him to go through with it, I should at least honor his dying wish, which was to be by his side for the whole event. By the way, this quest does not end until he dies, so you must sit and watch in real time as he slowly loses consciousness. This whole thing lasts a full minute and is one of the longest minutes of my life. Everything about this quest was just so real. There were no gimmicks involved in this quest, and CD Projekt Red wanted there to be none. They wanted you to sit through the entire process, no matter how dark this got. The quest left the player with lots of choices, and this is truly a great showcase of the writer's talent to create a story that seems to have an element of choice. It's one quest that has stuck with me for the past year and one I probably won't ever forget. Everything about this was just so enthralling but terrifying. I was constantly waiting to see where this quest would go, but I was also worried what would happen by the end. The fact that this quest has no characters relevant to the main story and are only seen during this quest just shows how good this really is. It never needed a character from the main story or a plot revolving around the main story to be good. It was just a standalone quest with one of the best stories I've ever seen. Our next quest is one that is also deeply disturbing, but in a different context. Just like before, we get a call from a random person during our playthrough. This person is Elizabeth Perales, and she wants us to meet with her and her husband Jeff. It sounds like I'm about to bring up the Perales questline, which I will very soon, but I want to focus on the other character involved, being River Ward. River is only slightly involved with the Perales questline, as the original job is to investigate the death of Lucius Ryan, the recently deceased mayor of Night City. River is important as he was spotted in the brain dance, so we contact him and ask if we can work together to solve the case. This part isn't too important, but the quest after it is. River will once again call us out of the blue, and when we arrive he will show us a recent news feed. The feed shows the cops doing a routine inspection of a car until the cops realize that the person in the car is a known serial killer. He's then subdued by police, and we see the passenger was dead prior to the police's arrival. The reason River shows us this video is because his nephew Randy had disappeared recently, and that kid was wearing Randy's shoes, so he suspects this killer Anthony had something to do with his kidnapping. River takes us to a place where Anthony used to be held. This place has some unique technology that can create BDs from dreams by forcing them to think of specific things in their life. I'm not really sure how this works, but it's not too necessary. We're trying to get Anthony to dream of past events in his life so that he can maybe give us a clue to where he took Randy, but after being caught sneaking in and a long conversation, this lady that we argue with eventually agrees, although very reluctantly. To find these memories, we need to search Randy's room for clues, where we find an email chain between the two. We also see a deeply disturbing video of this farmer with his cows, and regardless of the context, it doesn't take away this eerie feeling that comes with it. After talking with the employee from earlier in the mission, we can compile a brain dance and see even more disturbing stuff about Anthony's childhood. His dad forced him to help around the farm, and since Anthony was a kid at the time, he obviously didn't know too much about farming, so he was bound to make mistakes, and whenever he did, his father would ridicule him for it. He also had so much pent-up anger from his dad that he even lashed out and killed his mom. Shortly after this, the father's business would fail, and due to this failure, he would kill himself. So now Anthony was an orphan with seemingly no friends or support system to manage his problems. The only thing that kept him calm was that cartoon of the farmer earlier. He became so fascinated with the farm and that cartoon that he continued his dad's work of running the farm, but instead of using cows, he used people. They were all hooked up to these giant machines that pumped various chemicals and gases into their lungs. Through the brain dance, we managed to discover where the farm is, and after breaking inside, we can rescue Randy and all the others that managed to survive. This, just like the quest with Josh, was such a memorable experience. It was a shocking and horrifying investigation where the outcome was never certain. It was never clear if Randy was actually going to survive or not, and that added some urgency and tension to this quest. Something I discovered recently was that you can actually fail this quest. If you don't get enough evidence during the brain dance, we have to choose between two farms, and if you choose the wrong one, then Randy dies. I'm honestly surprised this was an option, but this just adds another layer of urgency, as Randy could actually die if we choose wrong. Detective quests in many games are always really intriguing, especially when they play into the world of the game. And with a game like Cyberpunk, where the world is technologically advanced, anything can happen, and I think that's a big reason why this was so fun. We truly didn't know how the cyberware and technology of Night City would have a hand in this quest structure, and the way it was utilized was really impressive. While River's questline was shorter than most of the multi-stage quests in this game, it has by far one of the most memorable moments due to its disturbing content. Our last quest is once again related to the previous interaction, but this time we'll talk about the other side of it. Jefferson Perales holds the title for the greatest side quest in the entire game. It is not only a fantastic quest with an incredible story, but it is so compelling that, judging from the comments on my previous video about it, many people wanted this developed into a full DLC. The questline originally is quite average and seems to exist just so that the player can be introduced to River. However, a couple days after completing the original quest, you'll receive another message from Jeff's wife Elizabeth. The couple had a break-in and they want to know who and why. Seeing as Jeff is in the running for mayor, there's a lot this investigation could bring up. It is possible that someone is targeting him because he's rich, or the person he's running against is trying to eliminate him. The two of them want us to look into it since we already unraveled the mystery of the mayor's death, plus they already tried their private security firm and they came up with nothing. The only details we can get from Jeff is that someone ended up breaking in. When he noticed, he reached for his gun and possibly shot the intruder before passing out and waking up the next morning with a terrible headache. This quest provides the player with an immense amount of freedom, as while Elizabeth does show you the penthouse so you can get a lay of the land, she never explicitly tells you what to search for. It's all on you to find the clues. Furthermore, some clues like this screen can't be turned on unless you spec into technical ability, and some doors won't open without enough points in the body tree. Obviously, the game isn't going to make the player spec into a specific tree to complete the quest, as that would be quite frustrating, but they do give the players more optional clues if the player has the proper skills. Everything we investigate also comes with a bit of dialogue that not only gives us more hints about the investigation, but also further develops the couple as characters. By investigating the table, Elizabeth will tell us about the election process, like how they're paying for everything out of pocket, and because of how much work there is to do, they just order pizza most days as it's too hard to cook. It's just genuine, fantastic storytelling, as it's making the powerful rich people seem like common folk, but also making these fictional characters seem real and fully developed. We eventually begin to uncover the story of the break-in as we see some emails from the private security firm Jeff had hired, and in one of these emails is a code to a room. This is already quite suspicious since the room is only accessible via a hidden door that the couple had no idea existed. However, continuing on, we understand the full story once we read the other emails that talk about one of its members being shot by Target Alpha. This explains the bandages inside the room, but this also connects the entire story that Jeff is Target Alpha and the security firm has been spying on them the entire time. After some further investigation, we notice a satellite dish on the roof and a comms tower, implying that the security team is nearby. We chase down the van, and after killing all the enemies, we try to get the data from the van until it's wiped by an external source. From what we saw though, it seems like they have brain scan data on the couple and are using neural links to implant new memories into them. This connects to one of the clues we discovered earlier, which is the couple's wedding photo. When investigating this photo, Elizabeth will say that she ordered blue roses for the wedding despite the picture clearly having red roses. The last thing we get to see before we're shut out of the van is that other people have been infected with new memories too. These people aren't important, but it's showing us that Jeff isn't a unique case. They're doing this to anybody, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or income. We relay the information to Elizabeth, who offers to discuss the matter in private. The game isn't done with twists, as we discover that Elizabeth knew about these changes in Jeff. His personality had changed overnight, and it almost felt like he was a completely different person. Elizabeth even noticed herself changing, and once it started getting worse, she was in such a total state of panic that she didn't even know if she could trust her own judgment. She also got a call from someone in a garbled voice telling her that her family's safety and happiness could end real soon if she attempts to figure out the truth. This presents the player with an interesting dilemma, as we have the option to tell Jefferson about this discovery. If we tell him, we could possibly ruin the lives of the couple, but it allows Jeff to know the truth, or we can keep it a secret and never tell him. It's got its own set of moral choices, as some may argue that the safety of the family is more important, but some could also argue that Jeff has a right to know what's going on. However, what's more important is what happens in the quest. This quest was the start of a massive community theory based around a group called Alpha Centauri. It's quite a complex theory, so if you want to know everything, you can check out my video on it, but to give you the short version, there was something very sinister happening in this game that could possibly affect all the citizens within its walls if they get their way. When we approach Jeff during the final part of the quest, we short-circuit temporarily as a garbled voice talks to us. It's quite possible that this was the same garbled voice that Elizabeth heard. On top of this, nearby watching over our discussion is Mr. Blue Eyes, the same one from the Rogue ending. He's not here before the meeting, and he leaves the moment we're finished, so that pretty much confirms that he's only here because of our discussion with Jeff. The theory doesn't stop here, as we have even more clues, as at some random point in the game we'll get a call from Sandra Dorset, which is the girl we saved from the intro. She needs our help getting back a databank that was stolen from her. If we go against her wishes and read the shard, we see that this Operation Carpe Noctem is eerily similar to what's going on with the Peralezes. Furthermore, Mr. Blue Eyes also has this very unique ring on his finger. It's also very similar to the ones worn by Big Joe, Arthur Jenkins, Jeff Peralez, Gary the Prophet, and Anders Hellman. They're all slightly different in color and design, which may imply that they're either marked by the organization behind the brain scans or employed by them in some way. It's possible that Mr. Blue Eyes is trying to further this organization's agenda by having V attack the Crystal Palace, which we see in the ending. This is why this whole theory is so compelling, because most of these characters are relevant to some of the game's ending, so it leaves this open-ended question about what's really going on. It's without a doubt the best side quest in the entire game, and by far one of the best ways I've seen a theory be developed, as it serves as a blueprint for how an engaging quest should be. One thing you may have noticed is that all the quests that I brought up today have the story at the forefront. There was little to no combat in any of these quests, and I hope the reception and positivity these quests received from the community tells CD Projekt Red they don't have to base the entire game around combat. Not everything is about shooting people and collecting loot. That's why the side activities were so boring, as it all felt repetitive, but with these I never felt bored, and in fact I was more engaged in the game than ever. Obviously not every quest is like this, and many of them still have lots of combat involved in them, but regardless of combat or not, a majority of Cyberpunk's side quests are well written and incredibly captivating. They're without a doubt Cyberpunk's biggest strength, and I hope they continue to lean heavily into this content in a future DLC. Keeping with the theme of positivity, let's end the video on a high note and talk about its story. I think this story is fantastic. Is it the best narrative I've ever seen? Absolutely not, but just by playing this game you can tell that there's lots of passion put into it. Furthermore, the themes within the game are quite thought-provoking, and if a game can make me think about its story even after finishing it, then it succeeded. Cyberpunk is a story about the race to immortality, how the rich will continue to reign over the poor forever, but it's also a story about one specific merc who wants to make it to the top. However, due to certain choices and actions throughout their journey, that dream of theirs will come crashing down. The game is split into 3 acts. Act 1 is before meeting Johnny, Act 3 is the ending, and Act 2 is everything in between. Act 1 on a first playthrough is really exciting. It's the beginning of a new game, so you're eagerly waiting for what comes next. After completing the life path, we get a 6-month time lapse of V and Jackie's life until we're given control again and are about to start a job. I have an obvious issue with that time lapse that many of you will agree with, but I'll get back to that later. The first job is quite basic and is more to get you familiar with all the game's mechanics. After this mission is where things start to evolve, as we are notified that the police are shutting down the Watson district. The game locks us out of the other districts until the first act is over, but it still gives us all the content within the district, so it's a nice way to ease the player into the game's side activities but not overwhelm them by unlocking everything. We're still not done with the tutorials, as we're introduced to the Ripper Doc clinics and then are given a quest with a great deal of choices. CD Projekt Red did an incredible job making the first act, as I was able to see everything the game had to offer, but was also only allowed to go within the first district so that I never felt lost trying to explore the whole map. That mission I previously mentioned is quite impressive and gives the player lots of freedom. The main goal of the mission is to obtain this flathead bot from the gang Maelstrom. Dexter Deshawn, the one who gives us the job, has already paid for it, but never got the bot and is hoping we can handle that issue. While Maelstrom seems like the only people involved in the quest, there's also a woman named Meredith Stout who's involved. There is an optional objective to call and meet with her, which can potentially lead to a deal. The other person with her is Andrew Gilchrist, who is also important. So now we have 3 different people that can be affected by our choices. All the options lead into 2 main branches. We can either resolve things peacefully with Maelstrom or slaughter everyone in the building. Then because of this choice and other choices I'll get to shortly, will either involve Gilchrist or Stout meeting us at the entrance. Firstly, when we meet with Maelstrom, we can pay for the flathead in a few ways, either buying it with our own money, a credit chip that Stout gave to us, or just shooting Maelstrom and taking it ourselves. This credit chip leads to other options, as the chip that Stout gave us was infected. We can either leave the virus, which will make us hostile to Maelstrom, or if we wipe out the virus then tell Brick about it, we can work with him to defeat Militech. Pretty much any option that forces us to shoot Militech ends with Gilchrist at the end of the quest, and any option that makes Maelstrom our target will have Stout at the end of the quest. These are just about every option involved in this quest, and it really allows for that feeling of freedom. You have so many options, and so many options within options, that it's overwhelming to piece all of them together. It's just upsetting that as we continue most of the game, it's quite linear from here. After doing all the tasks that Dexter has assigned us, he meets with us to discuss the real reason we did all this prep work. At a building called Konpeki Plaza, there is a penthouse owned by Yorinobu Arasaka, the son of Saburo Arasaka. Apparently, in this room, there is a device called the biochip and is extremely expensive. Our client Evelyn Parker, who we met previously, wants this biochip. This is where we get introduced to the brain dances of Cyberpunk, and once again, more on those in a moment. Jackie and V's job is to infiltrate the building, sneak into Yorinobu's room, and steal the chip. Everything goes completely backwards, as Yorinobu comes back to his room and has a meeting with Saburo. It continues to go even further south, as he strangles his own father and puts the building in lockdown. The two use the opportunity to escape until their escape attempt ruined the case the biochip was in, and it needs to be put into someone's head for it to maintain the temperature. Despite both of them being injured, they manage to make it downstairs and escape the plaza until Jackie succumbs to his wounds and dies. So, where to begin? Firstly, this act was a roller coaster of emotions, in a good way. It was a really well-made first act, although one of my biggest complaints is this act's length. Even on repeat playthroughs, assuming you skip through all the dialogue, this will take about 2 hours. I don't consider the game to start until Act 2, as that's when everything is open and available to the player without any restriction. This act is actually what stops me from playing the game sometimes, since I know I need to get through this incredibly long act before I can actually explore Night City. What definitely doesn't help is that long brain dance introduction too. On your first playthrough, the brain dances were great, but now knowing I have to go through them again on another playthrough is just exhausting. This is what makes this act so hard to talk about. Running through this on your first playthrough is wonderful, and I have no issues with it, but on future playthroughs it starts to become really tedious. While this does bother me, it is really situational, as not everyone will feel the same about the first act as I do, and some people may not even play the game for another playthrough. Regardless, what's more important is Jackie. I've come to the conclusion that CD Projekt Red did not care about Jackie, as they wanted the player to focus more on Johnny than they did Jackie, which is quite ironic considering more people like Jackie. The reason I say this is because of the time lapse from earlier and his death. The less time we spend with Jackie, the less opportunities we have to build a relationship with him. I would have much rather preferred the game just make me do these missions with Jackie rather than just showing us a time lapse because I stopped caring. We aren't building that connection together through our jobs, and we're not feeling like an actual team. We aren't helping one another during combat engagements or just working together. The intro is a really good example, as you and Jackie can work together to defeat the guy with the machine gun by being a distraction while Jackie tackles him. You feel like a fully functioning team that is working together to achieve a goal. Everything else you do with him doesn't feel like this. The only times we join him are when we buy the flathead and when we steal the biochip, but everything is done by yourself. You control the decisions of the Maelstrom conflict, and you control the Flathead so you're able to get inside Yorinobu's room. He just feels like a companion that tags along and will do what you do and go where you go. He isn't given an opportunity to shine on his own. His death also bothers me greatly because this had zero impact on me. I sound like a heartless person, but it's not because I had no attachment to Jackie. It's because CD Projekt Red spoiled this in a trailer a year before the game's launch. In their E3 2019 trailer, Jackie and V escape a building and use the Delamain taxi service to drive away, then Jackie shortly dies after, just like in-game. This trailer shows us Jackie and says his name, which means this person, who may or may not be in the game, is Jackie. They didn't even try to hide his haircut or face, as he looks exactly like the way he does in-game. So prepare for the game, I watched most of the trailers again, like the 48-minute gameplay demo and this cinematic trailer because I thought it looked really nice. So imagine my face when I found out that this Jackie person is in fact a real character in the game. There was still some hope in my mind that we could maybe save him or he wouldn't have been shot at all, but that started coming true when I noticed him limping with a bullet wound in his stomach. If you're going to make me care about a character, don't show them dying in a trailer prior to the game's release. If Jackie's death managed to surprise you, then I'm glad, as the way this was shown to the player and how the next interaction starts with that slow faded intro and low monotone voice of V was really well done, but it was completely ruined for me as I saw it coming way earlier than I should have. Before we enter Act 2, we see V approach the No-Tell Motel to meet Dex, who then shoots him for screwing up the job. We then finally get introduced to Johnny Silverhand and get to see how the Arasaka Tower was destroyed 50 years ago. It's a nice introduction and really highlights how much of a dickhead Johnny can be, as instead of just dropping the bomb and leaving, he needed to complete another personal mission of his, which is how he got killed. This is where the big plot twist of the game starts, as it's discovered that V will die within a few weeks. Before Jackie died, he took the biochip out of his head and gave it to V. When Dex killed V, the nanites in the biochip were working on repairing his brain, but since he wasn't fully brain dead yet, the nanites could only repair part of his brain, which is why Johnny and V can coexist. The problem is that this isn't supposed to happen. It's either V or Johnny, not both, which is why V is slowly dying as the biochip is eating away at his central nervous system. V's main goal now has changed, as instead of making it to the top, he's now desperately trying to save his own life. This was a really nice plot change, and a nice way of putting it into perspective of how the fear of immortality can change you. Can you imagine how it must feel to hear someone say you have weeks to live when the day prior your death wasn't even on your mind and you'd figured you'd just die of old age? All those things you wanted to accomplish or do in life won't ever be finished, as your life expectancy has been drastically reduced in the blink of an eye. CD Projekt Red really wanted to capture the desperation and fear of something like this, and I think they nailed it. Act 2 starts and ends really strong, as we get introduced to Johnny Silverhand. It's very apparent from the very first conversation they have that the two are bitter enemies and want nothing to do with one another. V wants Johnny out so that he can live, and Johnny wants to take over control of V so that he can get revenge on Arasaka again. The game allows you to play into this, as you can cut conversations with him short by by taking your prescribed pills or just outright leaving. It was nice that the devs had given you the option to truly express how you feel about Johnny through gameplay. However, I don't think Johnny is a bad person. Kinda. Yes, he's still an asshole who killed a ton of innocent people, and his ego never really goes away throughout the game, but at least between him and V, things do change between the two. Johnny gets more sentimental and calm in the later parts of the game, and he comes to accept the fact that he can't change the world and he's just a ghost in V's head. V is also dealing with this frustration, as the entirety of Act 2 is about searching for a cure. He tries to find Evelyn to see if she has any info on the chip, and this doesn't work. But thanks to some brain dance, V ends up working with the Voodoo Boys, but that didn't work either. He even captures the creator of the chip, and not even he can help him. These failures aren't just affecting V, it's affecting us too. We're like detectives trying to find new leads, but every single one we find leads to a dead end and we're running out of options. The two of them are struggling together and eventually learn to accept the other and are willing to help one another to complete their goal. The two by the end of the game have seemingly exhausted every option possible except one, as the only one that has shown any promise is Hanako Arasaka, the sister of Yorinobu. Thanks to our interrogation with Hellman, V is able to download the blueprints of the biochip and uses this data to strike a deal with Hanako. The start of Act 2 sees V being rescued by Takamura, the same one who guards Saburo Arasaka. Takamura is the only one who believes that Yorinobu murdered Saburo. Takamura is also on the run as Yorinobu betrayed him, so he wants to get back at Yorinobu and find justice for Saburo. So Takamura works with V to discuss each other's plans and eventually agree to meet with Hanako. Takamura wants to meet with her to prove that Yorinobu is a killer, and V wants to meet with her to see if she can get him access to a place called Makoshi. Makoshi is the only reason that Johnny is alive and in our head. After blowing up Arasaka Tower, they stored his soul on a data drive and kept it in this place called Makoshi. This place holds other people who signed up for the Secure Your Soul program. Originally, it was used for people to talk to the dead after they had already passed, but there was a newer version of this tech made, and it's the one that's in our head. Instead of someone being a hologram after death, they can take over a person's body so they can continue to live, just be in the body of another person. This would then allow that person to be immortal. V needs to use Makoshi's access point so that he can split himself and Johnny so that he doesn't die. V then discovers that Makoshi is deep in Arasaka Tower, so we know where to go, but we don't know how to get inside. The game then provides us with 4 ways to accomplish this and are considered the game's 4 endings. Our first option is V working with Hanako so that they can bring down Yorinobu Arasaka and bring Saburo back into power once again. After this happens, its top scientists will help V with the chip. Instead of that route, we can either have Pam and the Aldecaldos join us and break into the tower, or have Johnny take over our body, and instead of those two, it's now Rogue and Wayland. If none of these satisfy the player, they can always take the easy route and commit suicide. The player is given many choices, and the way they set this scene was brilliant, as it's just you on a rooftop looking at Night City trying to make your final decision. The game lets you sit here as long as you need, so you never need to feel rushed about your final choice. CD Projekt Red wants you to consider everything you've gone through and everything you felt throughout the game and use those emotions and feelings to make a decision. Each ending invokes something throughout its time, and it gets the player thinking about their decision. What really hits the hardest is the moment when you discover that every ending ends in your death. The biochip has progressed so far that survival is not possible anymore. It invoked a feeling in me that I haven't experienced in many games, that feeling being that everything I did was completely useless. We were doomed from the beginning and it was all for nothing. That's what makes these endings so great, and this decision has an impact on other people's lives, not just your own. If you join Arasaka, then we discovered that they used you as a test dummy and were able to replicate the process, allowing Saburo to live in Yorinobu's body. Saburo is no longer bound by the body and can simply take over a new one when the current one he's using has passed. In our desperate attempt to help ourselves, we let the biggest corporation in the world learn the secret to immortality. If we do the suicide ending, then we affect everyone that we've ever met. It's the easy way out and the least bloody option, but what's the point of going through all this work just to give up at the very end? The final 2 decisions are not just about Johnny and V's relationship, but our relationship with Johnny. V is destined to die within 6 months, so we either keep our body and say goodbye to Johnny, or have Johnny take our body instead. According to Alt, V's own body sees him as an intruder now, and we are left with a decision. Let V keep the body and live out his life for the next few months until he dies, or give it to Johnny, who can live much longer and also be able to experience a new life again, not bound by his rocker boy persona. It's a tough decision of sacrificing your life for a friend or continue to live but also having to say goodbye to yet another friend. Cyberpunk's ending was fantastic, and while it was very sad that nothing we did truly mattered in the end, the way the story was told was extremely well done. As for my final thoughts on the game, Cyberpunk is always going to be a phenomenon of the gaming industry. Never have I seen a game gather so much hype and also simultaneously let everyone down at the same time. As I said before, Cyberpunk isn't a good game, but it's also not a bad game either. Its gangs and fixers feel underdeveloped, its technical issues are still very prevalent today, and some of its systems like crafting and side activities are just boring, dull, and useless. However, if you want to play the game for its story, then you will not be sorry. Its attention to detail within its open world makes it one of the most gorgeous settings I've stepped foot in, and its side quests and story are worth buying the game for just that alone. Cyberpunk to me has always been a complicated game to discuss because it wasn't overwhelmingly good or bad. To me it was just perfectly average. But with some time and hope, this game could maybe become what it was originally intended to be. Thank you all for watching today's video. If you enjoyed, then leave a like and consider subscribing for more content like this. If you want to check out a video similar in style to this, then I recommend my full analysis on the Halo series or Prey. Both are quite long, but if you've made it this far in the video, that shouldn't matter, and you don't need to watch those videos in one sitting. Of course, you can always watch all the lore videos I made back then on Cyberpunk, as some of the content discussed in this video had full videos dedicated to it, like the side quests and cyberpsychosis. Regardless, thank you for making it to the end, and to my returning viewers, I thank you for coming back. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.